The automatic camera clicked steadily as Major Robert Cowboy Stout's F-6F Hellcat swept over Peleliu at 8,000 feet. It was September 12th, 1944. The Pacific stretched endlessly below him, broken only by the coral fringes of the Palau Islands. His orders were simple routine, even. Fly over the northern airfield, photograph any visible installations, and return to the USS Hornet. Intelligence had briefed him thoroughly that morning. The field, they said, was abandoned, wrecked by repeated bombing raids. Stout's mission was a formality, another box to check before the Marines landed in a few days. But when he banked slightly and looked down, his blood ran cold. The airfield wasn't abandoned. It was alive, bursting with activity. Below him, the supposedly destroyed airstrip was packed with Japanese aircraft. Mitsubishi A-6M0s gleamed in the sun. Nakajima bombers squatted along the tarmac, their wings glinting like blades. Dozens of aircraft, wingtip 2, the wingtip, lined in perfect rows. Fuel drums were stacked neatly in rows beside them, and ground crews moved briskly between planes, checking engines, loading ammunition, fueling tanks. They weren't hiding, they were preparing. Stout counted fast. 35 no 40 aircraft at least, fully armed, fully fueled. Every one of them poised for flight. And he knew exactly what they were waiting for. In 3 days, 28,000 Marines would storm Peleliu's beaches in one of the largest amphibious assaults of the Pacific War. The invasion fleet, hundreds of ships, was already steaming toward the island. These Japanese aircraft were positioned to massacre them before they even reached shore. His training flashed in his mind: observe, record, report. That was the recon pilot's creed. His job was not to fight, but to see. Find the enemy. Radio coordinates. Return to base. Let command handle it. That's how it was supposed to work. But Stout also understood how slowly the machinery of command turned. He imagined the timeline. Land on the Hornet, file his report, watch intelligence confirm, then wait for the Admiral's approval to mount a strike. Hours, perhaps a day, would pass before bombers even reached Peleliu. And by then, the Japanese would have dispersed their aircraft into revetments, hidden them under camouflage nets, or worse, launched them straight toward the fleet. By the time proper procedure caught up, hundreds of Marines would be dead in the surf. He circled higher, thinking fast. Below, the pattern of parked aircraft and stacked fuel drums formed a deadly kind of symmetry. The Japanese had made one critical mistake. They'd packed their planes too tightly. No spacing, no separation. One spark, one explosion, could set off a chain reaction that would consume the entire airfield. He checked his ammunition. 6. 50 caliber Browning machine guns, 2,400 rounds total. 12 seconds of fire at most, nowhere near enough to destroy 40 planes individually. But maybe enough to light the fuse. Stout's gloved hand hovered over the throttle. His pulse thudded in his ears. This was no drill. Robert Cowboy Stout wasn't reckless. At 28, he was a seasoned combat veteran, 63 missions behind him, dogfights over Rabaul, strafing runs on Truk, landings on pitching carriers in typhoons that grounded half the air wing. He'd survived everything the Pacific could throw at him. He knew the line between courage and suicide. What he was about to do walked right along that line. If he attacked, every anti-aircraft gun on the island would zero in on him. He'd be alone. No wingman, no cover, no suppression fire. One lucky hit to his engine or cockpit would turn his Hellcat into a smoking wreck in the jungle with no hope of rescue. But if he didn't attack, those aircraft would launch in waves, 40 planes diving on the invasion fleet, strafing landing craft, bombing transports, setting the sea itself on fire. He'd seen it before at Tarawa. He'd flown support there, helpless as Japanese bombers tore apart packed landing craft, turning the surf red. Marines had died by the hundreds in those first hours, pinned under relentless air attack. He wouldn't let that happen again. The decision came in less than 30 seconds. Stout shoved the throttle forward. The Hellcat's engine roared. He rolled into a dive, the altimeter spinning wildly as the island rushed up to meet him. The jungle canopy blurred into a green smear. His plan was simple. Come in low, hit the fuel drums first, and get out before they could react. At 2,000 feet, he leveled off and rammed the throttle to the firewall. The Hellcat screamed forward at nearly 400 miles per hour, just 50 feet above the jungle tops. Trees whipped past, their fronds slicing the air like whips. Then, through a break in the foliage, the airfield appeared. Japanese ground crews looked up, confused at first, then horrified. Some froze, others dove for cover, but none made it to their anti-aircraft guns in time. Stout lined up the northernmost row of aircraft. His thumb pressed the trigger. 6 Brownings exploded into thunder. Tracers leapt from the wings, bright lines of fire walking across the tarmac. The rounds ripped through the first Zero, tearing its fuselage to shreds. Fuel gushed out, spraying the ground. He adjusted his aim, raking a stack of fuel drums between 2 bombers. The impact was instant. The drums erupted in a blinding explosion. Fire rolled outward like a living thing, engulfing both aircraft in a sheet of orange. The blast was bigger than Stout had expected. It slammed into his Hellcat like a hammer, rocking the plane as he yanked it into a climb. Behind him, the fire spread fast. The burning Zero touched off the next, then the next, each eruption feeding the next in a chain of destruction. Within seconds, the northern half of the field was ablaze. Japanese ground crews scattered in chaos, their shouts drowned by the roar of detonations. The airfield vanished under a rising tide of fire and smoke. Then the anti-aircraft guns opened up. Tracers stitched the sky, bright red lines curving toward him. He weaved hard, jerking left and right to spoil their aim. A 20mm shell slammed through his tail section. Another punched a hole through the right wing. The cockpit shuddered, warning lights flickering, but the Hellcat held together. He climbed sharply, rolled right, and banked back toward the field. Below, the devastation exceeded anything he'd imagined, half the planes burning, flames sweeping across the runway, black smoke boiling upward in thick columns visible for miles. But on the southern end of the field, another 20 planes sat untouched. He glanced at his ammo counter, half gone. 6 seconds of fire left. Every instinct told him to pull away. He'd done enough. He'd lit the fuse. But enough wasn't enough, not yet. He rolled inverted and dove again. The second attack run was suicide. The Japanese gunners were ready now. The sky filled with tracers, bright threads of death weaving around him. He jinked wildly, never flying straight long enough for them to get a solid lead. The Hellcat groaned, the control stick heavy in his hand, metal tearing somewhere behind him. He came in from the south this time, leveling barely above the ground, lining up on a row of bombers. He squeezed the trigger, his remaining ammunition raked across fuselages, ripping metal, puncturing fuel tanks. Flames erupted. He walked his fire across a parked fuel truck. The truck exploded in a colossal blast, flipping a nearby bomber onto its back. That detonation triggered more explosions, ammunition crates, stored bombs, secondary fires. The southern row went up in a chain of thunderous eruptions. His guns clicked empty. The Hellcat shuddered as he pulled up, smoke streaming from a tear in the full fuselage. Hydraulics stuttered. The stick felt heavy and unresponsive, but below him, the entire airfield was engulfed. Every aircraft, every fuel drum, every structure consumed by fire. The inferno spread outward in rolling waves, painting the sky black. He'd done it. In 8 minutes, one pilot had destroyed an entire Japanese airfield. Stout pointed the Hellcat toward the sea. The engine still roared strong, but the gauges told another story. Oil pressure dropping, hydraulic fluid leaking, one control surface sluggish. He was wounded, and so was his bird. The long flight back to the Hornet felt endless. The adrenaline drained away, replaced by cold clarity. He had directly disobeyed orders. His mission was reconnaissance, only observe and report, not engage. And yet, he'd done the opposite. He could already imagine the aftermath: formal inquiries, stern officers, possible court-martial. But then he pictured the invasion fleet, thousands of Marines, their landing, craft packed tight, heading for the beach under skies now free of enemy aircraft. He could live with discipline. He couldn't live with their blood on his conscience. The USS Hornet appeared at last, a grey speck on the horizon. Stout keyed his radio. "Hornet, this is Recon 2-1. Aircraft damaged, hydraulic failure, possible landing gear malfunction, requesting priority recovery." The deck crew cleared the landing area. The carrier turned into the wind. As he approached, he tried lowering the gear. One wheel came down and locked, the other only half extended. He didn't have time for another pass. He came in hot, a rough approach, catching the second arrestor wire hard. The Hellcat slammed onto the deck, metal shrieking. The right wheel collapsed, and the aircraft skidded sideways, coming to rest against the barriers. Deck crews rushed forward, fire extinguishers ready. The tail was shredded, the fuselage peppered with holes, the paint scorched black. Stout climbed. Down from the cockpit, his flight suit streaked with sweat and oil. A crowd of officers converged immediately. The air boss demanded an explanation. Why had a reconnaissance pilot returned with combat damage? The intelligence officer wanted to know why he'd broken radio silence. The squadron commander's face was unreadable. Stout stood at attention, helmet under his arm, and gave his report in a steady voice. "The airfield wasn't abandoned, sir. It was operational, 40 aircraft being armed for attack. I destroyed them." There was silence. "Destroyed them?" Someone repeated, incredulous. "All of them," Stout said. 8 minutes, start to finish. The room stared. Recon photos confirmed it the next day. The northern airfield at Peleliu was nothing but blackened ruins. 40 aircraft exactly lay in twisted heaps. Fuel dumps had detonated, hangars were gone. Not a single Japanese plane remained flyable. The intelligence division revised their assessment overnight. The air threat to the invasion fleet had been eliminated. The Marines would go ashore under clear skies. The Navy Cross came weeks later. The citation praised Stout's extraordinary heroism and aggressive fighting spirit in attacking superior enemy forces alone. He had risked everything: his career, his life, his aircraft, to stop an attack that hadn't even begun yet, but he never spoke of it that way. When the medal was pinned to his chest aboard the USS Hornet, Major Robert Cowboy Stout stood silently. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the official citation was read aloud in a voice that echoed across the deck. Yet those who knew him well said he didn't smile. He wasn't proud of decorations. He was relieved that what needed to be done had been done. To most of the crew, the event was almost unreal. One man, one plane, 8 minutes of combat, 40 enemy aircraft destroyed. It sounded like wartime legend, the kind of exaggerated tale sailors told in bars after too many drinks. But this one was real. Reconnaissance photos, gun camera footage, and eyewitness reports from other patrols all confirmed it. The Japanese had been ready to launch a massive strike that morning. Stout's unexpected assault had destroyed not only their aircraft but their fuel stores and ordnance depots. The resulting explosions had ripped through ammunition bunkers and maintenance hangars, wiping out months of preparation. The island's air defense capability had vanished in minutes. When the Marines landed on September 15th, 1944, they met no Japanese aircraft, not one. The skies above Peleliu were empty except for American fighters and bombers providing cover. The only threats came from the ground artillery hidden in caves, machine gun nests carved into coral ridges, and soldiers dug into labyrinths of tunnels. The battle that followed was hell. Marines advancing through the heat and coral dust described the island as a furnace. Temperatures climbed past 115 degrees in the shade. Canteens boiled in the sun. The coral ground shredded boots and tore through skin. The Japanese defenders, numbering over 10,000, had transformed the ridges into a fortress. Every hill was mined, every cave was connected by tunnels, every position had interlocking fields of fire. American forces suffered terribly, but they did so without a single air attack disrupting their landings or supply runs. Not one bomb fell on the invasion fleet, not one strafing run tore through the beaches. The Navy pilots maintained air superiority from the first day to the last, and the Marines, though bloodied, kept advancing. Historians later calculated that Stout's decision probably saved between 500 and 1,000 lives on that first day alone. Without his preemptive strike, Japanese aircraft would have descended on the fleet at dawn, targeting the landing waves while they were still clustered in landing craft transports. With Marines exposed on open decks and no cover, the death toll would have been catastrophic. His 8 minutes of defiance changed the course of the invasion. Yet when the war ended, Stout didn't see himself as a hero. He returned home, quietly, settling in California. The war had ended, the Pacific was at peace, and men like him were suddenly expected to slip back into normal life. He married, raised a family, and took up work in civilian aviation. His Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor, sat in a drawer. It was never displayed, never bragged about. His children grew up knowing their father had flown fighters, but little else. To them, he was simply Dad, the man who fixed bikes, mowed the lawn, and took them fishing. They didn't learn about Peleliu until decades later, when military historians traced the mission reports and connected them to his name. When they asked him about it, he only shrugged. "I saw planes that needed destroying," he said. "So I destroyed them. Any pilot would have done the same." But that wasn't true, and he knew it. Most pilots would have followed orders to the letter, radio the report, return to the carrier, wait for instructions. That's what their training demanded. Disobedience was dangerous. Acting without orders could end a career, or worse. Yet Stout's intuition overrode his caution. He recognized that if he didn't act immediately, those planes would vanish, and the cost in marine lives would be unbearable. That instinct, the willingness to act based on what he saw, not what he was told, is what set him apart. In time, the Navy came to see his defiance not as insubordination but as initiative. The official evaluation of his actions noted that Stout had displayed initiative and tactical judgment under extreme pressure. The phrase was deliberate. The Navy knew it couldn't publicly encourage disobedience, yet it recognized that sometimes victory depended on officers willing to think beyond procedure. In later years, the concept became part of formal doctrine. Commanders' intent. Commanders issue orders based on an intended outcome, not rigid steps. Subordinates are expected to use their judgment to achieve that goal, adapting to conditions on the ground. Stout's decision over Peleliu became a textbook example. His mission was to protect the invasion. The method, attack or observe, was left to his discretion when conditions changed. He had fulfilled the intent of the order, even if he had broken its letter. His example is still taught in military flight schools and leadership academies today. Trainee pilots study the engagement not only for its tactical precision, but for the decision-making behind it. Stout's attack demonstrated nearly perfect prioritization. He didn't waste ammunition trying to destroy every plane one by one. He understood that the stacked fuel drums were the true vulnerability, the single point of failure that could take down the entire field. By focusing on that, he maximized his limited firepower. His approach pattern, low, fast, unpredictable, made it difficult for gunners to target him. His use of the terrain to mask his approach, his decision to strike from multiple angles, and his willingness to abort once his ammo ran out, all revealed extraordinary discipline under pressure. He didn't panic. He didn't overcommit. He attacked, achieved the objective, and got out. It was combat efficiency distilled to perfection. Decades later, military historians reviewing Pacific combat records struggled to find another solo attack with comparable impact. Many pilots had destroyed multiple planes in dogfights. Some had single-handedly sunk ships. But no one else had destroyed 40 aircraft in one mission, especially not while flying alone against a fully operational airfield. Even among fellow aviators, Stout's achievement became legend. Pilots spoke of it in ready rooms and training halls. "Cowboy Stout," they'd say, "the man who wiped out an airfield by himself." Yet to Stout, it was just another day. He'd seen a threat, and he'd neutralized it. His logbook for that day was characteristically dry. Under remarks, he'd written only, "Enemy airfield active," multiple aircraft destroyed, returned with damage, no flourish. No mention of the inferno he'd unleashed. Years later, when his service records were declassified, researchers found the after-action reports filed by the Hornet's intelligence division. They included reconnaissance photographs showing the total destruction. Every Japanese aircraft was a blackened husk. The fuel depots were gone, ammunition dumps leveled, and the runway cratered by secondary explosions. The photos were so dramatic that some analysts initially suspected a larger bombing raid had taken place. Only when cross-checked against flight schedules did they realize the truth. Only one Hellcat had been in the air over Peleliu that morning. Robert Stout's. His story might have remained obscure if not for the rediscovery of those records in the 1,980 seconds. Military historians and journalists pieced together the details, cross-referencing Japanese loss reports, US Navy logs, and post-war interviews. The full picture emerged: 1 man, 1 aircraft, 8 minutes, 40 enemy planes destroyed. The numbers bordered on myth, but every document confirmed them. For Stout's family, reading those reports was like meeting their father for the first time. The quiet man who avoided attention had once made a decision that altered the course of a battle and saved hundreds of lives. When asked why he hadn't talked about it, he said simply, "Because the war wasn't about medals. It was about making sure the guy next to you got home." That was the kind of man he was. The deeper historians studied his mission, the more they realized how extraordinary his judgment had been. Every move he made, targeting fuel stores, attacking from opposite angles, cutting short the engagement, once the objective was reached, reflected instincts honed by experience and sharpened by necessity. He didn't have time to think in words or plans. Every decision came in seconds, driven by years of flying and fighting. When his guns fell silent, he didn't linger to confirm kills or savor victory. He climbed, turned for the sea, and left the burning field behind. That restraint saved his life. Many pilots died not because they lacked skill, but because they couldn't disengage. They stayed too long, circling the wreckage, giving ground gunners a second chance. Stout didn't make that mistake. He knew when enough was enough. After the war, he never sought recognition. When fellow veterans brought up Peleliu, he changed the subject. When interviewers asked him about the legendary attack, he brushed it off. "I just did my job," he'd say. It wasn't heroism, it was common. But those who studied him saw more than common sense. They saw a man who embodied the highest ideal of combat leadership, the courage to act without permission when action was required. That kind of courage doesn't come from recklessness. It comes from clarity. Stout knew the risk. He understood what disobedience meant, but he also understood what would happen if he did nothing. The difference between courage and compliance was measured in marine lives. In that moment, the weight of command shifted entirely onto his shoulders, and he bore it alone. When he died in 2005, at the age of 89, few outside of military circles knew his name. His passing was noted briefly in local newspapers: World War II Navy pilot, recipient of the Navy Cross. There was no mention of Peleliu, no recounting of his 8-minute battle. Only later, as historians and military institutions revisited the records, did his legacy begin to take its rightful place. The Naval Aviation Museum added his story to its archives. Training programs referenced his decision-making as a model for adaptive leadership. Pilots studying combat ethics debated the fine line between duty and defiance, between following orders and fulfilling a mission's true intent. Every year, new generations of aviators hear his name. They study the black and white photographs, 40 charred aircraft, fuel fires still burning, smoke curling upward in dense spirals. They read the mission report: attack successful, target eliminated, aircraft returned damaged. They learn about the man who chose to act when others might have waited. And they're reminded that sometimes history turns not on grand strategies or massive fleets, but on one person's decision in a single instant. Robert Cowboy Stout's legacy is not just in the number of planes he destroyed, but in what his choice represents. It shows that obedience is not always the highest virtue in war, that initiative, Courage and judgment can mean the difference between victory and catastrophe. Military strategists still debate it. Should Stout have been disciplined for disobeying? Was he justified in risking his aircraft and potentially revealing his fleet's presence? The theoretical arguments continue, but the practical result cannot be denied. His attack worked, the invasion succeeded, lives were saved. And perhaps that's the simplest answer of all. Sometimes, doing what's right means doing what you're not told. When new officers are taught about initiative under fire, they are reminded of a principle called mission command, the understanding that subordinates must be empowered to act when communication is impossible or orders are outdated. Stout lived that principle decades before it became official doctrine. He trusted his eyes more than his radio, his instincts more than procedure, and his purpose more than the words of a briefing. That's why his story endures. Long after, the Hellcats stopped flying and the carriers became museums. His name remains in the annals of naval aviation as a man who, in 8 minutes, changed the course of a battle and perhaps the war itself. The Marines who landed on Peleliu never knew him. They fought and bled on the coral ridges, unaware that a single pilot had already cleared the skies above them. Many of them never made it home. But those who did, those who survived those first terrible days, owed their survival in part to a man they never met. Robert Cowboy Stout never asked for gratitude. He simply did what the situation demanded. In the end, that's what true heroism often looks like, not grand speeches or parades, but a quiet moment of decision when everything is on the line, and one person chooses action over fear. When you think about the kind of courage that defines greatness not just in war, but in life, remember him. Remember the lone Hellcat diving through smoke and fire, guns blazing, every tracer a heartbeat of defiance. Remember the explosion that turned an airfield into an inferno. Remember the man who saw disaster coming and refused to wait for permission to stop it. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are not about following orders. They're about knowing when not to. Cowboy Stout knew, and because he did, thousands of others lived.